Each year, I interview between 400 and 500 energy experts, half of them from the United States, Europe, and to a lesser extent from Asia. As a rule, interviews with Canadian experts are very different. Canadians, as a rule, are very parochial and inward looking when it comes to energy. For example, the discussion about building another oil pipeline is focused on how much oil Alberta can produce, how it's being held back by federal regulations. But rarely do we talk about whether there will be international customers for that oil. The same holds true for natural gas and LNG. If we extract it, they will come, should be our national motto. International experts are much more concerned with the energy transition and the electrification of global economies. They understand that the key electric technologies, solar, wind, batteries, EVs, and heat pumps, have passed their inflection point on the adoption S-curve and are now the lowest cost, best performing option in most markets. They understand that electrification is driven by China, which has built enormous capacity to manufacture electrotech and is aggressively exporting into the emerging markets of the global south. Most importantly, they understand that the global energy system is fast approaching an inflection point of its own, where oil and gas demand will peak and electrotech adoption will continue growing exponentially. Now, ironically, much of the energy media community understands much better than Canadian politicians that the global energy system is rapidly changing. Former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau viewed clean energy through a climate lens. It was all about lower greenhouse gas emissions to meet Paris Agreement targets. His successor, Mark Carney, was an international leader in climate finance. When he talks about clean energy, it's usually about lowering emissions, not building a national economy that would be competitive in an increasingly electric future. Not always, to be fair, but mostly. My interview with Lucy Craig of Norwegian firm DNV illustrates how non-Canadians view the energy transition. She doesn't deny that oil and gas will still play a role in 2050, but it will be much diminished and its role will shrink even faster in the second half of the 21st century. This, in my opinion, is the best way to think about the energy transition. Understand that rapid and intense change is already happening, mitigate risk in sunset industries like oil and gas, all the while taking full advantage of the new investment and job creation opportunities created by the electric future. Instead, Canada's energy conversation is hijacked by Alberta and is consumed by Premier Danielle Smith's continual complaining about how poorly her poor province is treated. Talk about a classic case of missing the forest by focusing on a couple of trees. This excerpt from my April 30th interview with Lucy Craig illustrates how energy transition conversation could go. You can find the entire interview on the Energy Media YouTube channel. And if you like our journalism, please support it financially by becoming a member of the channel. One question I wanted to ask you, Lucy, is our perspective here at Energy Media is that we are in the sixth industrial revolution or the fourth industrial revolution, but we're clearly in a technological revolution. And energy has now become like a subset of that technology revolution. And so there are all these other areas like AI and materials and chemistry and so on, where advances in one affect the development of technologies, of other technologies. And they have this symbiotic relationship now in a way that they didn't have in the past. And that is a big contributor to the acceleration of this energy transition. And I just wanted to get your view on that.
I like that talk about how the different technologies influence one another. Perhaps a parallel in the energy sector is whole system thinking, because as the sector is changing from the traditional fossil fuels and also fossil fuel generators supplying load centers through transmission distribution networks, we now see a much more interconnected system. So we can have generators in local residences through solar PV. We have generation also long distance from land through offshore wind. And we are expecting our transmission distribution network to transform to enable those changes. And at the same time, we're looking to decarbonize the oil and gas sector through the use of low carbon fuels, for example. And so instead of considering each of these elements as independent technologies, independent generators, consumers, we need to start looking at the system as a whole. And then, of course, to go back to your question, yes, that progress is very much impacted by developments in material science, in digitalization above all. And it's very clear that the adoption of digitalization, including AI, will be an accelerator as well as an enabler for this energy transition. I would say of all those technologies you mentioned, it's digital technologies that really will have an impact on the pace of change as well, because as the system becomes more complex, it becomes more essential to have those digital tools to enable it to happen.
Yeah, and I think we should acknowledge that some countries are going to be at the forefront of change, some are going to be in the middle, and some are going to lag. And it's not necessarily their state of current development or their state of current energy sophistication, we'll call it. It's their embrace of change and their willingness to invest in these new technologies. And I think China is just the poster child for this. I know we call it the first electro state, and China is really driving change, isn't it?
Absolutely. China now is moving very fast, have installed more wind, more solar than any other country. In fact, the solar installations in China in 2023 were higher than solar installations in the rest of the globe combined. And as a result, they have some of the lowest electricity costs on the planet. Yes, policy in the energy sector is absolutely vital, policy and long-term commitment to really enable these goals of the energy transition.
Yeah, your report talks about regional differences, and I tend to think of the world as global north, global south. And it's clear that the China is leading change, and it's moving into the global south, into Latin America, into Africa, into Middle East, and into Asia in a big way, and is bringing along not only its export of these clean energy technologies, but it's also got a manufacturing investment strategy, and it's industrial diplomacy. I've heard it referred to. So, what role do you think China will play? Or maybe the better question is, how will China affect the development of those emerging economies in the global south?
Um, I would say, of course, a lot of the technology that is produced or that is needed for the energy transition is currently produced in China. So, solar PV modules, also batteries. China is a large producer, so it has an important role to play globally as well as for its domestic production. I think more generally in our report, you mentioned the regional differences, and absolutely there are important regional differences. I mentioned at the beginning that we see big uncertainty and therefore more turbulence in the North American market, also in Europe. But Middle East and Africa are powering ahead. And actually, there the reason is that we see huge optimism in Middle East and Africa about both aspects of our energy supply. Both fossil fuels and renewables are growing fast there, and so we see that as the reason why there's big optimism there, whereas much greater uncertainty in other regions.
Well, let's talk about the Middle East and Africa for a moment, because we're seeing some of the super majors shift their investments, their upstream oil investments into places like Guyana, where they have low break-evens, sort of anticipating this decline in oil demand maybe after 2030. But I've interviewed some of the African producers, and they're very bullish on this idea that the global south is going to stick with oil and gas as opposed to electrifying. And how do you see that playing out? Particularly in Africa, but also, I guess now that I think about it, Middle East, I mean, Saudi Arabia and some of those other countries, I mean, they're pouring billions, tens of billions into things like hydrogen and solar and so on.
Exactly. So, our own studies demonstrate that the energy transition, so the transition towards electrification and through electrification to higher percentage of renewables in the energy mix, is happening across all global regions. And of course, the pace is slower in some than others, as we've just mentioned. But that will happen Middle East and Africa as well. And as you've highlighted, huge investments in some of the world's largest solar plants in the Middle East, actually to demonstrate that you can have 24/7 power from a combination of solar and battery installations. And so I would argue, based on actually the facts of what we've seen already, as well as deep analysis of where the technologies are heading and where policies are heading, is that energy transition is going to happen across all those regions, including the Middle East and Africa.